In fact, I've heard hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of hits from people attempting to obtain tickets. However, well, yeah, I must admit that it was somewhat overpowering. Imagine this. Late at night, Jimmy Page sits by himself with guitars observing him silently from the walls. The room feels tight, almost hostile. For a moment, it sounds like he's about to name only one band, the one music history got wrong. But that delay is a trap. Because the truth is darker. It was never one mistake. 4 was the time. Music, for bands pushed aside by ego, timing, and louder names that rewrote the story. And the first name that emerges in Page's head is music, one that still makes him nervous. The Rolling Stones. This one is uncomfortable and Page knows it. The Stones were never supposed to be termed underrated. Not with music's durability, notoriety, or headlines. They prevailed on paper. But beneath the tale, Page sensed something decaying. A band whose image consumed its musicianship, music, whose mystique slowly destroyed the work itself. Swagger got louder than sound. Scandal became more memorable than structure. Critics stopped listening and started myth-making. And, music, Page saw the disparity worsen with each passing year. The rivalry was never screamed. That was not as cold as it was. Zeppelin chased power. Peril. Music, a precision-based myth. The Stones chased danger too, but wrapped it in attitude and turmoil. The world admired the posture and forgot to scrutinize the workmanship. And Page was troubled by that, music, because what does it say about history when survival is more important than content? When being iconic exceeds being exact? When noise replaces depth? The Stones weren't underestimated by success. Music, respect undervalued them. And the question remains unsettling and piercing. Did the world appreciate the band or just the concept of them? Page is drawn back in time to the beginning of it all by that unsettling thought. Before mythology, before civilizations, before anyone knew what rock was supposed to sound like. The recollection becomes sharper at this point. The Yardbirds. This one stings deeper than Page ever confesses. And it still burns. The Yardbirds were innovators before innovation was, music, hot, before distortion was accepted, before risk was rewarded. They transformed blues into something more potent and perilous that the business lacked the vocabulary to describe. But instead of being crowned pioneers, they were quietly rewritten out of the story. They were actually the laboratory where ideas originated, but history reduced them to a footnote and a springboard for larger myths. During hectic rehearsals that hardly covered the rent, sounds that would later rock stadiums were originally explored in small bars. Page watched those thoughts walk away wearing someone else's name. There was animosity here. Not loud, not public, but toxic. A creeping, gnawing bitterness that came from seeing former colleagues and successors construct fortunes on foundations the Yards poured, music, and were never rewarded for. The experiment was forgotten while the world rejoiced over the outcome. And it is where the discomfort lives. Because if the Yardbirds were so vital, so ahead, music, so significant, why were they the ones erased? Because if you listen to the music, you'll hear how expertly it's played. And so look, you can have one virtuoso musician. Page's thoughts shift once more, music, not to another legend but to a band gradually deteriorating due to quiet neglect and comparison. Humble Pie suffered from similarities they never asked for. And that was, music, the first betrayal. Every piece pitted them against louder, flashier bands, as if genuine hunger was a weakness. Every album was judged by criteria that were never theirs to meet. Rules designed to help someone else succeed. The fact that everything happened so silently only made it worse. No scandal, no explosion, just slow erasure, while safer, more commercial acts were hoisted up. Night after night, Humble Pie were forced to labor on the road, spilling their truth into rooms that were only partially occupied. Page became increasingly uncomfortable as she watched it happen. He respected their tenacity because it reminded him of something scary. Music before polish, instinct, music before strategy, and Tego had spooked the industry. You couldn't package Humble Pie. They couldn't be softened without destroying their essence. Music, they played harder as the walls closed in, toured relentlessly, refused to bend, and still they were pushed aside, discreetly replaced by bands that asked less and offered less. Injustice of that type, music, never goes away. It furs. Because it made him address a question he still dislikes, Page never forgot it. What happens to real bands when the world determines honesty is a liability? The Beatles. Page is aware that this one verges on heresy. The Beatles were revered, canonized, untouchable. Their tale was recorded in Scripture. Their song indisputable truth. However, Page thought that their shadow grew so big that it engulfed everything in its path. Not by malice, by momentum. History was not only shaped by their rule, but it was also flattened. Innovation was credited to them initially, even when ideas were already hanging in the air, waiting to be claimed. Bands who followed weren't heard on their own terms. Music, they were measured, reduced, rejected as mimics, no matter how creative, no matter how dangerous. Page observed this unfold in real time. He saw journalists reach for the same parallels again and again. He watched nuance lost, risk removed. Complexity condensed into a single narrative that was easy to sell and impossible to challenge. And that's where the discomfort dwells. Because if the Beatles were actually so far ahead of everyone else, why did so many other outstanding bands fade in their wake? The Beatles weren't underrated. They were overcorrected by history at the expense, music, of everyone else. And once that concept sets, there's nowhere left for Page's mind to run. No more names, no more comparisons, only the weight of what all of it implies. Music, Page reclines with her fingers resting on an antique guitar neck, the wood smoothed by years of frustration and aspiration. He's lived long enough to see how celebrity actually works. And how easy it lies when history requires a tidy story. These food bars weren't undervalued by mistake. They were inconvenient. They didn't match the narrative. They weren't cautious. Music, they defied comfort, refused formulae, and stood too close to the fire while others learned how to package risk and sell it back to the world. And for that, they paid the price. Page has watched talent be disregarded while image was rewarded. He's seen depth lose to timing, originality crushed by marketing, and truth buried under noise. Success, he knows now, is rarely about who flames brightest. Whoever lasts the longest without causing discomfort to others is the winner. And that raises an unanswered concern that still makes him uneasy. Was history ever really about greatness? Or is it simply about who figured out how to be loud when the time was right? Because those who meant most, the true legends, are frequently the ones who are left behind. There is one last thought Page can't shake. Darker than all the rest. It comes in slowly, quietly, like feedback humming moments before an amp screams. Music, a discovery that taints appreciation, making it more akin to loathing. Because if these bands were ignored, erased, rewritten, or quietly pushed aside, music, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't unlucky. It has nothing to do with timing. It was a system running just as designed. A machine that punishes depth, promotes compliance, and crushes anything that defies control or simplification. Page knows this equipment intimately. He dealt with it, fought it, used it when he had to, and survived it by being just dangerous enough to be profitable. Others weren't so lucky. They were chewed up, drained of ideas, then discarded after their usefulness expired. Page has discovered that history dislikes music resistance. It likes its heroes clean, its narrative straightforward, its legends repeated. It values mythology over truth, appearance over craft, comfort over confrontation. It doesn't like bands that, as could difficult inquiries. Artists who refuse to soften the edges are disliked by it. People were uncomfortable with the bands. They challenged the listener instead of satisfying them. And they were silently, effectively, and forever punished for it. So the last question hangs there now, heavier than any chord Page ever played, sharper than any solo he ever twisted into shape. How many outstanding bands go unheard? Not because they failed, but because they refused to be convenient.